Do you want to know how to do some simple but really useful edits in Luminar? That's what this video is all about. I'm going to show you how you can produce stunning photo edits while only using the Essentials panel in Luminar. Let's get started. So before you can edit photos in the Luminar Essentials tab, you'll need to double click on a photo in your Luminar library. So if you're in the grid view here, double click. This will bring up the photo in the loop style view. Then you just click on edit right up here, the top right corner, to enter into the editing view of Luminar. Now from here, you have on the side your various panels, and if you just tap here, this is the Essentials panel. It will bring up the Essentials panel for you to work with. And a series of these tools will appear, including light, AI enhance, color, just a lot of basic tools that you can use for really powerful edits. In fact, really, you can edit with just the Essentials tab, and your pictures are going to turn out just fine. You can really do a lot with them and make your photos just have that really professional touch. Because inside the Essentials panel, you have exposure adjustments, contrast adjustments, white balance adjustments. You have some basic color adjustments, and you also have some more sophisticated selective color adjustments when you go down and you open up the advanced setting menus. So let's take a look at a basic editing workflow using the tools just in the Essentials tab, nowhere else. One that's just going to really make your photo shine. So first, what I often call step 0, you can just try going in here to this AI enhance, which is really Luminar doing its magic, and you just pull it up a bit and then see how it looks. Like in general, it's going to make your photos look a little bit better. It's not going to finish the whole edit for you, but it'll look pretty good. Sometimes it won't look good at all, but it just makes sense to try it out and see what you get, and then you can go from there. And then, so once you've done that, like you do the AI enhance, see if you like it, and then you can carry out some other important functions. You can move on to step 1, which is using the light tool for white balance adjustments. Now, first you just click here on the light tool to open this up, and then the thing is, like, the reason that we do white balance adjustments is to counteract any color cast, color shifts in your photos. So look at your photo and ask yourself, does it look too warm, too cold? Do you have any color cast? For instance, if you had a cold color cast, you might see something like this. If you had a warm color cast, you might see something like this. And even if you don't see anything, it could be because your eyes have sort of adjusted. And so it often just makes sense to come up here to the custom drop, or to the white balance drop down, and then just toggle through these. So see what you think of the daylight, white balance setting, the cloudy, and you can watch the temperature shifting here as you go through to balance out any color cast from these particular lighting conditions. And if there is a color cast, the quickest way to correct it is going to be through the preset, through one of these just basic menu items. But the thing is, if you've used these but you still feel like there's a color cast, then you can just go ahead and click on this dropper icon, and then you come over here and just follow the instructions. Pick a target neutral, so something that's not supposed to be pure white or pure black, but it's supposed to be just a neutral gray color. And in this picture, I actually don't have that many options, but here could be an okay spot. See, it's a bit too cold because that spot was fairly warm. But in general, that's going to be a good way to just sort of fine-tune your white balance. And Luminar will just hone in on the spot you've selected, and it will balance out the image's color to make certain that it just looks very natural. And if you're still not satisfied then, so for instance here, I'm not satisfied with this, then you can actually just drag along these temperature and the tint sliders to really make sure you get the look that you want. Generally, it doesn't come to this, but you can use these. The tint slider is generally less useful than the temperature slider because light tends not to shift along the green magenta axis. It tends to more be in the yellow and blue axis. And so here, like I want the photo to look natural, but also it was taken in the late afternoon or evening when the light was fairly golden, and I want to really convey that. So once I finish with this, then I recommend going on to step 2, using the exposure slider to maintain detail. Now let me zero that out. So when it comes to image editing, one of the first things you're going to want to consider after you've done the white balance is your exposure. So you ask, is your photo too bright? Is it too dark? Is it just right? Now, beginners have a tendency to leave things a bit too dark, resulting in a muddy, kind of unpleasant effect. So it's important to avoid this whenever possible. But how do you actually edit for a proper exposure, and how do you determine what is a proper exposure in the first place? Well, I'd recommend you start by just looking at the brightest and darkest parts of your photo. Determine whether you've captured details in both the blacks and in the whites, in the darkest parts and the lightest parts. The best photos generally keep detail up to the darkest blacks, which is called the black point, and the whitest whites, often referred to as the white point. Now, if you have areas that really lack details, that's a pretty good sign that you've underexposed or overexposed your photos, and that just generally doesn't look that good. So then what you'll want to do is just come here to the exposure slider and make just some slight adjustments until you regain any lost details. Now in this photo, the exposure is pretty good, but imagine if I opened it up and it looked like this. Then these greens are just really pushing into the really dark zone. So I would just boost the exposure in order to bring back the details. Now, you can also check your exposure via the histogram. A histogram up here, see, that is skewed all the way to the left, where the peaks are all just over here, is a sign of underexposure. And then if it's skewed all the way to the right, where the peaks are over here, that's a sign of overexposure. And so you can just make those simple changes, and your photo will immediately be looking better. Now next, I recommend using the contrast slider to add punch to your photos. You see, contrast just tends to make things look crisper, clearer, and punchier in general. And images often look pretty dull when they come right out of camera, which is why adding contrast is just really critical. And so, for instance, with this picture, you can see the difference between no contrast, or really, if you remove contrast, and then a lot of contrast. Now, maybe that's going a little bit too far, but in general, contrast just looks quite good. And one of the cool things about Luminar is just how easy it is to spice up your photos with contrast. You just have to push up the smart contrast slider a bit until things just start to look good. And if you want a slightly different look, you can also come down here under the Advanced Settings tab. You can just play with the whites, which are going to boost the very light parts of the photo. Play with the blacks, which will adjust the very dark parts of your photo. And then just have a really nice contrasty look that just captivates the viewer as soon as they come across your photo. And a bit of contrast can just go a long way, so really don't neglect this step. Step 4 is to just add a bit of vibrance or saturation for improved colors. So to access these sliders, you just come down here under the color tool, click on this, then you have saturation, and then you have Vibrance. Now, the truth is that most photos could use a color adjustment of some kind because it's really easy to end up with lackluster colors. So, fortunately, these sliders are a very quick and easy way to deal with this, and it can make your photos look really, really nice. Now, you don't want to go too far, but saturation just boosts the intensity of your colors in general. And vibrance is going to be a bit more selective, focusing more on the cooler colors. It's known to protect skin tones. And it also is just going to focus less on the colors that are already very saturated and more on the colors that are much less saturated. And you know, if you have time, you can just go ahead and work with both sliders and see what you feel like really works. Here, I think we don't want to go too far, but it's worth boosting these purples and these yellows in the background. And then next, step 5, you're going to want to do a little bit of sharpening through the Details Enhancer tool. And this is just sort of a finishing touch that you add to your photo. Come down here to Details Enhancer. Because this picture is such a soft, sort of artistic photo, I'm actually going to come over here instead. Let's go this photo. So, you know, if I were working with this photo, even if I've worked with a very sharp lens, even if I've taken this with a very sharp lens, I'm still going to want to add a little bit of sharpening. And so just have to come here, maybe magnify the photo to get a sense of what's happening, and then I just boost the sharpen slider. There we go. It's just going to add a little bit of sharpening. It's not going to be super obvious, but that's not really the point. Instead, it should just add a sort of an edge of crispness to the photo. And if your photo has lots of small details, you can boost this. The slider here, it has medium details. Work with this, or large details. Work with this, like with this tree. You have very small details, so you might want to come in and just boost this a little bit. And so you have some options there to fine tune it a little bit. And then for your final step, the basic Luminar processing workflow, is just applying noise reduction with the denoise tool. And this is simply just going to take the noise or grain that's in your photos that makes it seem kind of muddy, and then just reduce that. So first, just come here, open the denoise tool, and then go ahead and magnify your photo, just so you get a sense of whether there's noise, where the noise is, and the state of the noise. And then you can just push up these sliders a bit. Now you want to be careful because as you push them up, you're actually going to lose detail in your photo, so it's sort of a compromise. But if you just are fairly conservative, you can just come in, reduce the noise a bit, and then end up with a really nice looking photo. And you can do that with both luminosity denoise and color denoise, which are 2 different types of noise that can impact your photos. And so, I mean, I recommend trying both of them and seeing how your photo ends up looking. And so now that you know these workflow steps, you should have a sense of how to edit using the Essentials panel in Luminar. In fact, if you follow the steps that I've given, then you're basically prepared to do fundamental core editing on all of your photos and just make them look really, really nice. And that's all I have for now, so thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for other photo editing tips and tutorials.